Минулого тижня член канадського парламенту Борис Вжевсневський виступив в парламенті, підтримуючи ратифікацію договору про вільну торгівлю з Україною і з усмішкою в очах виголосив виклик Верховній Раді України. Котрий парламент, канадський чи український, швидше зратифікує цей договір.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we begin our debate here this evening, I note that tomorrow morning the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement will be debated in the Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's parliament. And I issue a challenge to Speaker Parubey in Ukraine's parliament and our colleagues and a sign of friendship to see which parliament will pass this free trade agreement first. Since 2000, Putin has methodically dismantled Russia's nascent democracy and created a new Russian dictatorship. At least 132 investigative journalists have been silenced in Russia through murder. Opposition leaders such as Boris Nemtsov symbolically assassinated outside the Kremlin walls. FSB defectors such as British citizen Litvinenko gruesomely poisoned by radioactive polonium in London, England. Madam Speaker, this past week I received the terrible news that my friend Vladimir Karamurza had been hospitalized in Russia due to acute intoxication by an unknown substance, poisoning. My prayers are with Vladimir and my thoughts with his wife, Evgenia, and their 3 children. Vladimir had testified before the Foreign Affairs Committee in Ottawa this past spring, stating that Canadian Magnitsky sanctions for gross human rights abusers would be a pro-Russian measure. He was joined on the panel of witnesses by Zhana Nemtsova, the daughter of the late Boris Nemtsov, also an acquaintance of mine, who'd come to Canada's Parliament in 2012 to testify in support of Magnitsky legislation and was assassinated 2 years ago on February 27th, and by Bill Browder, whose lawyer said Magnitsky had been tortured and killed in a Russian prison for uncovering, documenting, and reporting a massive fraud against the Russian people by individuals sanctioned by President Putin. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, we must join our American legislative colleagues in sanctioning gross human rights abusers by expanding our Special Economic Measures Act to build upon the U.S. Jackson-Vanik repeal and the Serhiy Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act of 2012. There are hundreds of projects that are funded, sponsored by Ukrainian Canadians. I mentioned the 2 soldiers that the Prime Minister had noted that evening who had facial reconstruction surgery. It was done by a doctor, Oleg Antonishin, in my riding, who's gone over and he's done this incredible work, as have other doctors. And I should mention there are camps being run by Ukrainian Canadians funded from Canada, which are also working in the area of psychiatry and psychology with the widows and the orphans of people who volunteered and fought on that front. Ukrainian Canadians continue to make an invaluable contribution to Ukraine at this time of Russia's war against the people of Ukraine. We have a proud history of Canadian Prime Ministers since 1991, both conservative and liberal, standing shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, the first Western leader to acknowledge Ukraine's independence in December of 1991, a day after the referendum for independence in Ukraine. Prime Minister Paul Martin, who during the Orange Revolution sent an unprecedented, up to that time, 500 electoral observers to Ukraine for the rerunning of the presidential elections. In fact, I note that former Prime Minister John Turner headed that mission. And when the former Prime Minister Turner was called and asked if he would head up that mission, Prime Minister Turner was older at that point in time, and it was Christmas in Canada, and he said, you know, I will go to Ukraine to show solidarity with the people of Ukraine, and perhaps I can celebrate with my family a little after Christmas. but this is too important that we show that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Ukrainian people. The example of Prime Minister Harper was given, and I'd like to also relate something I saw during the Prime Minister's state visit to Ukraine. On the first evening, there was an event, and as usual, crowds were gathering around the Prime Minister. He noted two soldiers who'd had facial reconstruction surgery done, and he pointed them out to me. We walked over to them, and everyone was asking for pictures of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister said, I would be honored to have a picture with these two Ukrainian soldiers, volunteers, who'd fought on the front line in Ukraine. It's symbolic of the sort of position that all Canadian Prime Ministers have had in regards to Ukraine. I'd like to thank our colleague across the aisle for all of his work on the Ukrainian file over these past number of years. And as he spoke, our support, the Canadian government's support, has been multifaceted. We're all thankful that in this House everyone stands united when it comes to CUFTA, the Free Trade Agreement. He also mentioned Project Unifier. The Minister of Defence last week signaled that the odds are this training mission will be extended. My personal hopes is that it'll be expanded, and I noted that the member had referenced that as well. And I also noted that he made a distinction between kinetic defensive weapons and non-kinetic defensive weapons. Back when he was a member of the government on this side, there was an opportunity to provide Ukraine with kinetic defensive weapons. And I was wondering, now that he's in the opposition, it didn't occur at that time, now that we know that Russia sent over 600 tanks into eastern Ukraine, over 1,000 artillery systems, and that Ukraine keeps looking for systems such as the Javelin to counterbalance the threat of those tanks. Now that he's in the opposition, has he changed his opinion about kinetic defensive weapons for Ukraine?
The honourable member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Crossway for his question. And I can tell you that actually it hasn't. My position today is a position I had when we were in government as well. And I did encourage government to look at using, some of our tank buster missiles as possible defensive equipment. Unfortunately, the ones that we were decommissioning were not considered useful from the standpoint of providing them to the government of Ukraine. So it's something that was discussed, but they were decommissioned because of the question around their efficacy, I think would be the more polite way to put it. So, things are also evolving. And what we're now witnessing is a bigger push by the rebels and the Russian military further into Ukraine. They are trying to gain more territory. And so because of this new aggression and this expanded land grab that's being orchestrated from the Kremlin, I think that there is now a need for us to provide Ukraine with those defensive weapons. And no doubt, as we are fighting in the wintertime, there still needs to be more supplies to help deal with winter weather. Ukraine's military is definitely getting better equipped all the time, but any chance for Canada to go and provide the required military equipment that's needed by the soldiers out there, we should be working with the government of Ukraine to make it happen.